When I was in high school, there was a kid who told everyone he was a demon. I don't feel comfortable even writing his real name for reasons you'll soon understand, so I'm just going to call him Patrick, even though his actual name sounds like something out of a Shakespeare play. Patrick was extremely socially awkward. He walked around with this super empty stare that made even teachers uncomfortable. He wore the same blank grey hoodie literally every single day. I'm not exaggerating when I say I'm pretty sure he never washed it, because he always smelled terrible too. He was decently short and pretty average looking, though it was hard to tell, because he always had his hood up and never took off his sunglasses, even inside. Eventually, the teachers stopped asking him to, because he would never listen anyway. Here's where things get weird. Patrick didn't have any friends, but he had this strange habit of adopting people. If he liked you, which seemed to happen randomly, he would come up to you and say, "You're adopted." This meant you were part of his circle or something. Apparently, it made you safe from him. At least that's what he claimed. He didn't adopt many people, though, so only a few of us were part of his circle. I was one of those few, and looking back, it was probably because he had a crush on me. None of us believed his demon act and just thought he was a troubled kid, which he definitely was. I should probably mention that this all took place in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Another girl I used to be friends with, Gabby, was also adopted by him. Patrick's crush on her was a lot more obvious, and all of my friends knew it. One day, my friends and I were hanging out at the dugouts behind our high school, killing time. It was me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke. Somehow, the topic of conversation shifted to Patrick's crush on Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was clearly embarrassed. I can't remember what nickname we used for Patrick, but we had one because his real name was too awkward. That day, though, Laura used his real name. The third time she said it, I swear on my life that Patrick appeared out of nowhere and jumped on top of the dugout holding a baseball bat in his hand. It wasn't scary in the usual sense, but it was one of the most unsettling things I'd ever seen. We quickly stopped talking, nervous that he might have overheard us. He didn't say anything, just stared at us. I gave him a small wave, and he nodded at me before jumping down and walking away. After he was gone, the four of us burst into laughter, trying to find humor in how bizarre the whole thing was. But on the inside, I was still shaken. She asked him what he was doing there, and he literally replied, "I was summoned." Laura's mom made some small talk with him before politely asking him to leave, which he did, silently. The reason more alarm bells didn't go off was that Laura's mom knew Patrick and pitied him. Laura and I, however, weren't as calm. As we walked back upstairs, we talked in horrified whispers about how creepy the whole thing was. A few minutes later, we made the connection between the two events. He seemed to pop up whenever his name was said 3 times. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we had witnessed 2 unexplainable events and knew Patrick's history of claiming to be a demon. How else could we rationalize what had taken place? We told all our friends about the incident the next day, and our friend group swore never to say his name 3 times in one conversation again. Things were fine for a few months, and I started to think maybe I had overreacted. Then one day, the same group of friends and I were hanging out at my other friend Johnny's house. We were on his back deck when the topic of conversation again drifted to Patrick. Despite all our efforts to convince him, Johnny refused to believe what we told him about Patrick. Even after confirming the story with the whole group, he was still skeptical. To prove his disbelief, he jokingly used Patrick's name 3 times in the same sentence. To our dismay, when nothing happened, he grinned and told us we were stupid to believe something so ridiculous. As annoyed as I was, part of me was relieved that Patrick hadn't shown up. I spoke too soon, though, because a few minutes later, Patrick jumped over Johnny's backyard fence. Johnny saw him first and stopped speaking mid-sentence. The rest of us went dead silent, nervous about what Patrick might do this time. He stared at us for a few seconds before jumping back over the fence and disappearing out of sight. Johnny freaked out and accused us of conspiring with Patrick to scare him. We insisted we had begged him not to say anything. We sat in silence for a while before Johnny eventually told us all to go home, clearly shaken from the experience. The last encounter I had with Patrick was by far the scariest and most disturbing. It was the only time I felt like my life might actually be in danger. A few months after the incident at Johnny's house, I was home alone one night. My parents rarely left the house back then, so it was a rare occasion. I decided to take advantage of the situation and invited a boy over whom I'd been talking to. He was kind of a jerk, but so were most of the guys I was talking to at that age. We were hanging out in my room and it was lightly raining outside. After a while, he mentioned something about Patrick, which made me visibly cringe. He got confused, so I explained the situation to him. He burst out laughing and told me he was going to say Patrick's name to scare me. I begged him not to, but he did it anyway. Only this time, he didn't just say it. He literally screamed Patrick's name 3 times at the top of his lungs. There was no delay this time. The moment he finished yelling, the rain picked up outside. A few seconds later, there was a flash of lightning. I started to freak out. The guy I was with actually seemed sorry and told me it was probably just a crazy coincidence. I cursed him out and ran to my window to look at the storm. I glanced down at my driveway and screamed when I saw a silhouette of a person looking up at my window. It was too dark and stormy to be sure, but I was 99% certain it was Patrick. I shut the blinds and rushed downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked. After locking the back door, I saw the figure again, only this time he was standing motionlessly in my front yard. I felt a panic attack coming on, convinced Patrick was going to find a way inside. I started screaming, "I'm adopted," over and over again, hoping it would do something. I knew there was no way he could have heard me, but my brain was all over the place at that point. The guy I was with ran downstairs a few seconds later and picked me up off the kitchen floor in an attempt to comfort me. I looked out the window again, and Patrick was gone. The storm was still raging, but there was no way I was going to check outside. The next morning, after the guy left, I went out to inspect my yard. To my horror, I found something sinister in the far corner of my backyard. It was Patrick's hoodie, and wrapped inside were a couple of random belongings of mine that I thought I'd lost. My parents were still gone, and I was too scared to call the police. I figured I'd show my parents what I'd found after school the next day and let them handle it. I never had to, though. Patrick didn't show up to school the next day, or the day after that. No one ever saw him again, and no one knew what happened to him. My parents still live in the same house, which is something I think about a lot. I know this isn't your typical scary story, but I'm not sure where else to vent about this. A few people from school told me they caught Patrick hiding and eavesdropping on their conversations, which could explain how he always seemed to show up out of nowhere. As I've grown older and thought back on the whole thing, I think what makes the most sense is that Patrick was just a mentally ill stalker who followed me and possibly other girls around, which is why he was always able to appear when his name was brought up. It creeps me out just imagining him following me around all over the place, listening to me. I don't even want to think about where he is now. A few years ago, something happened that still gives me chills to this day. I was with my friend Mike, heading to a dinner party on a snowy Saturday evening in Denver. Before arriving, we decided to stop at a liquor store to pick up some drinks for the party. It was one of those nights where the snow was starting to come down hard, but we figured it was just a quick stop. We grabbed some local craft beers and a bottle of whiskey, and as we were about to leave, Mike realized he wanted to get some nicotine pouches, his latest habit. He ran back inside, and I waited in the car, already irritated since I was the one driving, and the roads were getting worse by the minute. After what felt like forever, Mike finally came back, hopped into the car, and we pulled out of the parking lot, heading to the party. The snow kept falling harder, blanketing the streets in white. What should have been a 20 to 30-minute drive through familiar suburban neighborhoods quickly became a slippery, tense drive. Let me just say, I'm not the best driver even in good weather, and the constant slipping of the car didn't help. After a few minutes of struggling through the snow, I turned a corner and saw something that immediately made my stomach drop. A car stopped in the middle of the street, hazards flashing with both the driver and passenger doors wide open. My first instinct was to drive around it and keep going. I mean, we were already late, and I didn't want to get involved in anything. But Mike, with his usual concern for others, told me to stop. Reluctantly, I pulled over. Now, you might judge me, but I'm not someone who goes out of my way to help strangers. Life has taught me to be cautious, and I wasn't about to risk it for a random car in the snow. Still, Mike insisted we check it out, and I knew arguing wouldn't get me anywhere. For a few seconds we just sat there, watching the flashing hazards. Mike asked again if we should go take a look, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I wasn't ready to get out, though. Something about the whole situation felt off. I convinced him to wait a few more minutes, hoping whoever owned the car would show up and everything would be fine. But nothing happened. Eventually, Mike had enough and decided to go investigate. Before I could stop him, he stepped out of the car and walked towards the vehicle. I watched him go, feeling a growing sense of unease. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move, something dark, maybe in the back seat of the car. My heart raced, but I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination. Then, just as Mike got close, I saw the car jolt, like something or someone was inside. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. Without thinking, I slammed on the horn, startling Mike. He jumped and quickly ran back to our car, and as soon as he got in, I floored it, speeding away from the scene. As we drove, I explained to Mike that I thought the whole thing was a setup, a trap. He wasn't too happy about it, especially since I didn't have any solid proof. He told me I was being paranoid, but I wasn't about to take any chances. The rest of the drive to the party was tense. Mike was upset and I was shaken. When we finally arrived at the party, things settled down. We ate, drank, and enjoyed ourselves, almost forgetting about what had happened earlier. But then, as we were getting ready to leave, the host turned on the TV to check on the snowstorm, and that's when everything changed. The local news was reporting on a carjacking that had occurred just a couple of hours earlier. A woman and her teenage son had been driving home when they saw a car stopped in the middle of the road, hazards on and doors open, just like the one we saw. As they approached to help, two men jumped out from behind a snowbank, while a third person crawled out of the trunk. They held the woman at gunpoint, stole her car, and drove off, leaving her stranded in the snow. My heart sank. I looked at Mike and he had the same horrified expression. That could have been us. We had almost walked right into the same trap. We told the others at the party what had happened, and it quickly became the topic of conversation. People were shocked, some even a little entertained by the drama of it all, but for me it was a wake-up call. Since that night I've become even more wary of strangers. I can't help but think about how close we came to being victims of a crime, and how many other people I've passed by without offering help because of my growing distrust. It's a feeling that hasn't gone away, and every time it snows I think about that car with the flashing hazards and wonder how differently things might have turned out. The events I'm about to share took place over 30 years ago, during my early childhood, so forgive me if some of the details are a bit blurry. I was around 10 years old at the time, and my extended family was enormous. With so many relatives, it was tough to keep track of everyone's faces, let alone their names. Every family gathering felt like I was meeting someone new, even though they all seemed to know who I was. My dad was one of 9 children, so on his side alone I had 8 sets of aunts and uncles. My grandparents, on my dad's side, were quite wealthy and owned a huge beachfront property that served as a communal vacation home for the family. The house was massive, big enough to sleep over 30 people. My family often spent large chunks of the summer there. Both of my parents had jobs that allowed them to either work remotely or take extended time off, and many of my aunts and uncles did the same. So the house was rarely empty, and I spent a lot of time with my cousins, some of whom I was closer to than my friends back home. One of my favorite relatives was my Uncle Joseph, who was the father of my cousin Brandon. Brandon and I didn't hang out much. He was pretty antisocial, but Uncle Joseph was amazing. He had this incredible ability to make me laugh and feel at ease. In addition to being great with kids, he was a licensed therapist and psychiatrist. I trusted him more than almost anyone else, and confided in him regularly. I'd even say he knew more about me than my parents did. That summer, something strange started happening to me. I began having extremely graphic and disturbing nightmares. They weren't always the same, but they were all emotionally draining. Things like family members dying or me being left alone forever. I don't remember most of the details anymore, but I do vividly recall one dream. It was a false awakening where I woke up, went downstairs for breakfast like usual, but found no one there. No food, no parents, no siblings. I ran through the house searching for everyone, but the place was empty. The dream ended with me sitting on my bedroom floor, sobbing, feeling completely abandoned. After several nights of these nightmares, I finally decided to talk to Uncle Joseph about them. I didn't want to tell my parents because I felt embarrassed. Uncle Joseph listened carefully, his face serious, as I described what I'd been experiencing. He even started writing things down in his little notebook. He suggested I try some self-reflection, though I had no idea what that meant at 10 years old. He told me he'd think about it and to come back if the nightmares continued. Of course, the nightmares didn't stop. After a few more sleepless nights, I returned to Uncle Joseph. This time he told me he thought he had figured out the root of the problem. He said that, deep down, I was frustrated with my parents and had unresolved resentment towards them. I was completely confused. I had always been a polite, well-behaved kid. I loved my parents more than anything, and the idea that I secretly resented them didn't make any sense to me. But Uncle Joseph was a professional, so I trusted his judgment. I asked him what I should do, and he told me it was normal to be scared by these realizations. He explained that dreams come from the subconscious, and sometimes our brain refuses to accept certain feelings, even if they're there. He suggested I start being more disobedient with my parents, saying no more often, arguing when I didn't get my way. For 3 days I followed his advice. I acted out in ways that were completely out of character for me. My parents noticed immediately and asked me to stop, clearly concerned by my behavior. I felt horrible for upsetting them, but I was desperate to stop the nightmares, which unfortunately only got worse. They became more vivid, more disturbing, and even more relentless. I went back to Uncle Joseph once again, begging him to help me. This time he seemed hesitant, but after some pleading he revealed his final suggestion. He said my brain was too mature for my young body and that I needed to set it free. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded terrifying. He told me that if I had one more nightmare, he'd tell me what I needed to do. That night, I went to bed scared out of my mind, but for the first time in days I woke up before the nightmare began. I should have felt relieved, but something felt wrong. I lay there in bed, afraid to move, even afraid to breathe. I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis, but I was petrified. After a minute of lying there in the dark, I heard something that I will never forget, whispering right next to my ear. It was Uncle Joseph's voice. I was sure of it. I whipped around in bed and screamed. Uncle Joseph jumped back and quickly left the room, closing the door behind him. I sat there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. For a moment I thought I might still be dreaming, but it felt too real. I didn't waste any time. I ran straight to my parents' room and told them everything. I told them about the nightmares, about Uncle Joseph's strange suggestions, and how I had just seen him in my room. My dad didn't hesitate. He stormed into Uncle Joseph's room to confront him. Uncle Joseph denied everything, of course, but my dad wasn't having it. A physical fight broke out, and my dad managed to grab Uncle Joseph's satchel, the one he always carried around. Uncle Joseph quickly packed his things and fled the house. My dad opened the satchel and found something sickening. Pages and pages of notes about dreams, specifically about inducing nightmares. There were articles about dream manipulation, personal notes about experiments, and past data from other subjects. It was horrific. Uncle Joseph was eventually arrested after the police found even more disturbing evidence on his computer. I won't go into detail, but it was clear that his intentions had been far darker than I had ever imagined. I never saw him again, and my parents never liked talking about it afterward, at least not around me. Looking back, I sometimes feel ashamed for trusting him, for being so naive, but I was just a kid. There's nothing I can do about that now.